Licia, hi, lovely to be here with you.
Lovely to meet you too.
So let's start at the beginning. What drew your interest to trauma?
I would have to say that it was my relationship with Bessel that I didn't really understand the word. I'd heard the term PTSD. But when I met Bessel and he started explaining to me what happens in the body when people are in sync and coordinated and connected, it made a lot of sense. And when he explained how trauma disrupts connection, that made a lot of sense. I've been working with the body for pretty much all of my professional career. He kind of drew me in because he thought the skills that I have are the skills that people who have trauma need to learn.
Yeah, I mean, that leads us on really well to the next question, which is, where do you feel, as a bodywork practitioner, where do you feel the role of bodywork is alongside therapy and psychology with regards to trauma?
I think that what therapists and psychologists don't always understand is how much the body is the generator of the feelings, is the generator of the thoughts, that our thoughts are constantly trying to interpret our states from what we consciously or unconsciously feel. And so many people aren't able to consciously manage how they feel. And they have all kinds of ways of shutting down their awareness of their physical sensations and their emotional sensations, which also happen to be physical sensations. You don't feel your emotions in your brain, you feel your emotions in your body. And so there are people who are so cut off, they don't know how they feel, they don't know how to handle their feelings, they get overwhelmed by them, they explode or they shut down. And so you can talk all you want, but that doesn't often change how people feel. And if you don't feel well, you can't be optimally functioning in the world. So bringing body awareness into therapeutic practice is enormously important. Somatic experiencing does that, sensory motor psychotherapy does that, embodied awareness does that. I think that awareness of people's bodies should be an integrated part of all therapy modalities.
Yeah, and do you see that changing gradually?
I see openness to it among some practitioners, and I see a lot more openness to it from the people who need the most help themselves, who haven't been helped by other modalities. But I also see a lot of confusion and resistance. I think the biggest confusion and resistance I see is that the talking, thinking mode of therapies presume that the therapist is not part of the physical picture and the physical relationship. And it's so important to have a relationship with your own body as a therapist if you are helping to build a safe container for someone to know and experience their own emotions. And that, I think that's very hard for some people who have never had that orientation before. I see a lot of professional resistance at experiencing their own bodies, vividly experiencing their own bodies.
Yeah. And you speak a lot about attunement. What does attunement mean to you?
Attunement, you could say that it's a special way of listening that that helps you calibrate your response to another person, or calibrate how you would like to align with another person. So attunement is not just attunement with another person, it's attunement with your own body, with my own body. I'm listening to my body, but I'm also listening to how my body responds to you. And I'm picking up from my listening to us together the signals of what your nervous system do. I see you nodding. I see your eyes are open. I can sense the slowness or fastness of your breathing, and how I'm responding, how you're responding to me. It's a real reciprocity, but it's a wordless thing. I can kind of talk through it, but it's happening. There's so many facets to it. So I call attunement listening. And even when you're tuning an instrument and trying to bring the strings into alignment so they resonate together, there's a lot of listening that happens to find the place where they're vibrating at the right way together that's harmonious.
Yeah. I mean, it's wonderful, your work with music. Could
Mm.
you tell us a little about your journey with music, and whether it also played a role in your own personal healing?
Um, I'd say that music has always been a part of my human experience. Um, I began singing as a young child by myself very early, and I didn't have a social sense of singing. Um, I just knew that I physically loved to sing, and I sang at the top of my lungs. And I think when I came to the United States as a young child and experienced public schools here, it was a very different experience from a tiny church country school in England. Um, and one thing that I remember was the tiled bathrooms that echoed that I loved to sing in, and what a spectacle I created when I did that at school, not knowing how socially unusual that was. And it was perceived as misbehaving, really. Um, but so I really became very private with my singing and my voice. But as an adult, I'd say I sang in choirs, but it was always sort of blending in and not standing out. But
Mm.
in my 20s, I started running a poetry open mic. And when people had the audacity to show up with guitars and sing original songs, I was quite jealous, actually, and realized that I needed to be more open with my voice, more public with my voice. And it turns out I have a very big voice, a big singing voice. And owning my voice and being seen with my voice is kind of like a superpower. In our culture, not everybody feels that they have the right to do that. Or there's a lot of fear of shame and being shunned. Um, but having a voice is something that calls attention to you. People orient when you make a sound. And yeah, I think that the work of reclaiming our voices and being seen in safety is a very important part of healing. Um, so I went through stage fright and open mics, and I would find that even when my fingers were trembling at the guitar, my voice was always strong and steady. So I've been lucky in that way. So I've helped people to vocalize as a body worker when I would find people that had tension in their body that a pressure point or a massage or kneading wouldn't let go, or breathing wouldn't let go. I intuited that they needed to make a sound, and I would make a sound and suggest that they try and make the sound with me, or I would make a sound loud enough that they could put their voice inside my voice. I just seem to have a lot of confidence with my voice, and it's been very helpful because a lot of times emotional release is so physically held down, and it's internal and it doesn't get released unless a sound is
Yeah.
expressed. Yeah.
And it's one of the things that in the kind of conventional talking therapy setup is just not acknowledged, so that, you know,
Right.
it's kind of considered like inappropriate or strange to make noises rather than words.
Right,
But
right. To moan or howl or even to cry. You know, people cry silently and they dab their tears away. And you know, sometimes our feelings are so big, you know, that I think that crying is not the same thing as exploding. It really is a very different kind of release, and vocalizing is important, and having a safe place to do it is important. And I think a lot of therapists who aren't aware of their own bodies and their own physiology are afraid of those sounds, are afraid of the bigness, as if there's some danger to it, um, as if they need to comfort somebody right away and shut those expressions off. But I think it can be really healing to just be held in safety while you are fully present with a big feeling like that.
yeah, yeah. And do you think, like from your years of experience and research, do you think that there are particular types of music that are more effective? For example, you know, chanting or drumming that have been used for centuries and seem so
I,
powerful to me.
I have to stop and say, firstly, I'm not a researcher.
Right.
I'm an intuitive person, and I've been able to listen with attunement and follow my physiological sense of what's appropriate. Um, and I have chanted and I have meditated and I have sung in choirs. Um, and I'm a big believer in improvisation. I do a lot of nonverbal vocalization that starts with humming and people hearing their own voices, hearing how their voices affect their physiology. I explain the physical mechanics of how vibration travels most easily through solids. And then next is liquids, and then is air. And we experience our auditory as being in the air, but we vibrate. We vibrate through our skeletons. We vibrate through our flesh. And even our little bones in our ears are solids that are vibrating, that are carrying the vibrations and that message to our brain. But if you hum, you can feel your vibration in your throat, say, or your chest. And if you plug your ears, you can hear your voice differently. You can hear your name, and you can hear an emotional attitude that you have towards yourself when you speak to yourself. Um, and there's tremendous joy in attuning with other people and singing with other people. I love that. Um, and it's part of safe connection, but I don't really use it that much other than as a communal experience. I do a lot of toning,
Mhm.
do sound baths and humming, and we call it oming, but it's really going through vowel sounds in a way that help create overtones and physical vibrations that people can feel in their bodies.
Mhm.
Um, and And those sounds are soothing ones. Those sounds are ones that usually help slow down a nervous system. They involve a long exhale that also slows down the heart rate variability. When you exhale long and slow, even with a little bit of pressure on your diaphragm to resist against, like with a, or any vocalizing also gives you a little more pressure, your heart rate slows down. And when your heart rate slows down, your nervous system calms down. It's part of the same thing.
Yeah. And how would you, in an ideal world, how would you like to see an understanding of the body, an understanding of the healing power of music, of art, inform therapeutic practices and
Mm.
different forms of therapy?
I would certainly love for anybody who's practicing in the mental health field to be as grounded and aware of their own bodies as possible. And I think if that were a cultural change that happened, that would be huge. I know that there are many people who are intuitively gifted as therapists, but to actually know what it is that they're doing, what it is that they're listening to in their own bodies and another person's body is a very, very powerful foundation for whatever else they're going to practice. And people's voices change. Owning your voice is a big thing. It's a big part of owning yourself. So I think that it's not usually considered a goal to have a person who's in therapy own their voice and be able to be seen and feel solid as they're being seen. But it's a big thing. And that's not to say that there aren't people who've been tremendously traumatized that don't find a way to have a public face that's calm, but that's different than being authentically in your body at the moment. There's a way to be in a performance mode, say, but to be fully present with what you're feeling is another thing. And what happens when you're able to do that is that you're able to discern where the choices are in your life.
Yeah. Which is so fundamental, isn't it, for trauma sufferers?
Yeah.
Yeah. And in terms of trauma, what would you consider priorities for people beginning work with trauma patients? Because there's all sorts of ideas about where one might go, but if one brings it right down to what you're saying, it's actually quite different, potentially, what a therapist would focus on initially, what they would consider the priorities.
You know, I get sent a lot of people who are afraid of their body awareness, really terrified of it. And they come to me thinking that they have to talk about what happened to them or that they have to remember what happened to them. And even though I do work that's very therapeutic and I've been around a lot of therapists and studied with who I consider the best, I'm not a licensed therapist in that way. I'm not a licensed talk therapist. And what I'm really interested in is helping a person to establish the capacity to be authentically present with themselves. And so I don't know from other modalities what their goals might be, but for me, being able to speak about your symptoms in the present moment, how I feel in the present moment, being able to know how I feel when I'm upset, what happens, what thoughts come up, what physical sensations come up with those thoughts, how does my voice change, and finding the physical resources to self-soothe, self-comfort, self-regulate, which is a kind of co-regulation. So people learn to, healthy infants get to learn to co-regulate with their healthy, loving caregivers. And there's some people who never get that attuned connection. And if you don't learn it early, it can feel very dangerous to go towards the things you may have longed for, but learned to do without in order to survive. And so finding safety in the things that help make us most human, that we might only be able to acknowledge in secret that we want, that can feel incredibly dangerous. That's what I work on.
Yeah.
And that's a different thing than telling a story about what happened.
Yeah, very, very different. It's a shame so many people are still in a situation where that's the kind of therapy that they're receiving in a way
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
what about art? I know art has been a large part of your life.
Yeah.
Where do you see art, you know, what's the role of art on the healing journey? And how can
Oh,
that
I
be
I think
used?
art is incredible and it's empowering, and it's a for some people it can be an incredibly safe vehicle for exploration and curiosity, and it's an avenue to joy. And for many people who, you know, all these things like play and art and voice, there are very elite levels to all those things. And there are also levels of ways that those such vitally important, essentially human things get relegated and stratified in such a way that people who aren't good get shamed and they lose access to. So I love art. I love poetry. I love writing. I love music, all those things, movement and dance. Those are intrinsically human things that everybody in a culture should have access to and voice to. And in Western culture, that's less and less so.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
And
and it's lovely to hear you mention play and joy, because somehow in the trauma field, the play and joy are rarely mentioned, but they feel so crucial to me as part of the journey.
right.
Um,
And to be able to know that it's a human birthright. It's the essence of self-realization is to have that kind of joy of life inside you. And perhaps none of us are fully healed unless we have access to that, you know. And that it's joy in connection, it's joy in communion, it's joy in cooking and sharing food and sharing time together and sharing stories together. That is, to me, what it means to be fully alive and engaged, or to be fully alive in nature and be able to take in the beauty of your surroundings, or to be fully engaged in your work in a way that you know you're making a difference in the world. All of that is a way of making meaning and making beauty and making life. And I think there's a way sometimes when people have been so incredibly hurt, they have to split off joy in fear that if they express that joy or own that joy, that somehow they're denigrating the part of themselves that was hurt, or denying that that hurt happened. And it's a really important part of healing is allowing that hurt part to re-experience joy.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah. And I guess it would be really interesting to know a little about your relationship with Benjamin Fry and what you think about his book, The Invisible Lion, and what you think of his contribution to the field of trauma.
Benjamin is a dear friend. He is a rock in my life. He's so steady and kind and thoughtful. And his book is the same. It's a very gentle hand holding through what can be very complex. He explains things very simply. And I think in a way that can alleviate the blame and shame that somebody can feel for their behaviors in life before they understand what it means that they've had a trauma in their life. And so many people have had trauma in their lives and don't understand it. And try and brush things off as, oh, that was a little thing. Oh, that was long ago. Oh, look where I am now, without realizing how deeply affected they are in the present moment by what's unresolved from their past. I had a therapist in a workshop say, well, what do I do if the person won't comply with me and won't put their hand on their heart or doesn't want to pay attention to their breath? How can I make them do it? And you can't make somebody do something like that they're terrified of doing without it being the antithesis of safety and something that's therapeutic. It has to be about the therapist being present with their own vulnerability in a way that makes it safer for the person they're working with to explore their vulnerability. So yes, ultimately, I would love it if we could all play and jump up and dance and sing together, but that's never how a workshop or a therapeutic relationship starts out. Usually I have people curling up in balls or not being able to make eye contact and never wanting to. I've actually had people become enraged at trying to feel a heartbeat or feel their breath. It's too unsettling. And to just be present and be able to accept that and respect where they are, they're much more likely to begin to be curious with that than more insistent cajoling or a label of being resistant.
So that sounds like where you also weave in your awareness of mindfulness meditation. Is that something that you kind of incorporate into your work?
It's interesting because I've never been trained in mindfulness either. I'm kind of, I've come to a lot of things maybe as organically as the people who originally coined those terms did. I think these are human experiences, but paying attention, being able to notice, being quiet and noticing what you notice might be different even than trying not to think or trying to be well behaved and sit and meditate in a very proper way. We start with a snapshot. What's calling in your body right now, or what do you see in the room that you're in right now? Where are you in physical space right now? And as you notice where you are in physical space, what do you notice that how does that make you feel? What happens to your shoulders? What happens to your breath? They're little pieces that we pay attention to. And then it's cumulative. How much more can you pay attention to? How much more can you follow in your body? And I play with things like tuning forks and singing bowls so that people can notice, well, if I hold a tuning fork and if I known I should have brought one so I could strike it and show you. Um, the tuning fork has a stem and two arms, and I use ones that have weights on the end. So they're like this with a stem on the bottom. And if you strike the weights, the vibration lasts for a long time, and you can place the base of the stem on your chest or your hand and notice, are you able to feel the vibration in your hand? Just that little thing is paying attention in a different way, paying attention to your physical experience in a different way. And if your attention, even subconsciously, is constantly going out to where am I going to be hurt, it's very hard to pay attention to where you physically are right now and notice, what am I feeling inside? So I guess I'm coming back to the same thing over and over again and repeating myself over and over again.
Yeah, it's a simple practice in some ways, but
Yeah.
it sounds like, and my experience also as a therapist with it is that it does require coming back to it again and again with clients, just in a really gentle way, and with ourselves, of course, always.
Yeah, always. And it's a practice. It's not a one-off. It's not like a pill that you can take once a day and not think about things. It really is a practice. And I do it all the time. I practice it, I teach it, and it's never the same twice. It's never the same twice. And I think the thing that this practice requires is the space to do it. Noticing, and the space to do it might mean, oh, I'm awake, I'm in the bed. Do I notice how I feel before I get out of bed? Do I take a moment to just, how does my body feel now that I'm awake? Do I feel fully awake? Do I still feel groggy? Where's the tension? You know, it's kind of, it's checking in, inside checking in. And you can do that any number of times during the day, but it's a practice. And when you have more space, it can feel luxurious or terrifying, depending on who you are. Some people can only do it with other people when they start. Yeah.
And have you seen, I mean, I'm imagining you've worked with so many different people over the years. Have you seen all sorts of changes come through your work with music and your work with art, your work with people?
Yes. Yes. I think the thing that I love how interesting people become to each other when they do this work. And when we do this work in groups, I've had people say to me, oh, I've come to workshops all over the world, but I have never met such fascinating people as the ones at this particular workshop. They're just so brilliant. They're so creative. They're so amazing. And what really happened is they opened up enough to themselves that they were able to be more attuned. They were able to come more in sync, and they were able to share more meaningfully with each other because they were so grounded in themselves. So I think there's an authenticity that emerges. I've had people say, oh, music sounds so different to me now. It affects me so deeply now. And I think the most important change is the possibility of knowing that you're a lovable person, and what that means. And there's so many implications to that unpack and change a life, but they're basic foundational things. It's not the exterior things, because everybody's going to act differently, but that internal foundation being there makes it possible to be relational And for some people who've been extremely lonely, that's a very powerful thing.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, touching.
Yeah.
Yeah. Finally, where do you see your work going? How do you see it developing in the coming years?
It's interesting because I, I I didn't have a language really for a lot of the things that I knew intuitively. And it's been a process of finding the language that describes what I do with people. Um, and now I find that I can talk for days and guide people in all sorts of exercises that I didn't have before. And the more language I find for the process to guide people, the deeper we go with it. And that's very exciting. So I've been actually helping guide psychedelic workshops, ketamine assisted psychotherapy workshops, where we front load embodied awareness. Because I think a very big thing that psychedelics do is they put you in touch with your insides and with your body. And there's so much inside us that we don't consciously know, and it brings that to the surface and brings it to awareness, or it takes us off into our inner spaces in a way that we see what's inside us very differently and see our connections, our cosmic connections that are also inside us. And some people think that they need really high doses to blast themselves there, um, or that their egos need to be completely shattered in order to have that experience. And I've actually seen people who are hurting because they don't have enough access to that without medicine. I think when we really, really practice the full awareness of our bodies, there is a psychedelic dimension to it.
Mm.
And I think psychedelic guides and people who work with psychedelics can be much more nuanced when they have embodied awareness. So that's important. I think it's an important practice and an important message. And yeah.
That seems to be kind of accepted more or less in the field of psychedelics, as far as I can tell, that embodiment is an important piece of that.
It's huge. It's huge. But ketamine is legal right now, fully legal. And there are practices and groups that give medicine to people and let them have their journeys unattended. And I think that for the most vulnerable people, that's an incredibly irresponsible thing to do. Um,
So
and
would you be interested to work more with psychedelics and with training for psychedelic therapy?
I love doing the trainings. They're very powerful and very empowering. And I love that I've been brought in to do embodied awareness with people who work with psychedelics. We also do embodied awareness with psychodrama, which is another kind of collective psychedelic experience. And it's incredibly powerful and beautiful. Yeah. So I would like to teach more. I love teaching. I love teaching in groups, and the work that I've done on one-on-one with people is also incredibly meaningful to me. So I think that's more of the same. And then I would like to bring more of my music back to me.
Mm. Do you play instruments? Are you mostly sing?
I play guitar, I play ukulele.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, I love the ukulele.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I noodle on the piano, but I'm mostly improvise, and then I write songs, solidified songs from my improvisations. I've led songwriting workshops in residential treatment centers and love getting people to spontaneously write a song in an hour. That's also very empowering. People discovering their capacity people who are terrified of failing or doing it wrong, being able to make it safe for them to make something happen. And then the reward for that is so glorious. Their wonder and awe at themselves and what they're able to do is great. Yeah.
Beautiful. That feels like a really great place to end, unless there's anything else you'd like to add.
It's been a pleasure to speak with you. I'm
Yeah.
honored, and I would not call myself an expert in any way except as an intuitive.
An expert intuitive.
Yeah. And maybe I'm not even that. There are plenty of intuitives that go places that I would never dare to say I go. But
it sounds like you go to a lot of different places, and it sounds like it's really, I mean, it really sounds like touching work. So it's been such a pleasure speaking with
it's been
you.
lovely to meet you, Luciana. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.